the conclusion of the rite, the unsolved mystery, when the final searches yielded no results, and the darkness that enveloped the hearts of those present grew even heavier, it became clear the burial rite could not be left unfinished. The empty coffin, which had been carried by hand, was no longer just an empty object, but a symbol of all the mystical forces that had woven through this land. It was a silent witness to something much greater than just death. It was a threat without a face. Oksana's body had disappeared, but her presence remained. And now, at this moment, the empty coffin had once again found its place under the church's canopy, where the dark walls and the high, cold vault felt more and more like the symbol of death waiting to close this cycle. People walked in silence, each with their own thoughts, and only the wines produced a quiet, almost forgotten sound. The steps echoed in the silence, and even the wind, which had once been a storm, now only lightly brushed against their faces. It was as though the world itself feared what was about to happen. The priest, though he felt the weight of an incomprehensible terror upon him, could do nothing else. He could not refuse, for he knew his duty, to pray for the deceased, even if the body no longer belonged to this world. His hands trembled, and he could hardly hold the censer when he began the prayer. But there was an unknown tension in his voice, one that made even the flames of the candles flicker, flaring brightly before dimming again. And as the prayers echoed through the thick walls, it seemed as though they reverberated deep within the heart of the earth, penetrating to a depth where no human soul should ever reach. The chants of mourning echoed through the church, but they did not bring relief. Instead, they only deepened the horror. The candles on the altar, trembling from gusts of wind, seemed to struggle to stay lit, like souls that could not find peace. People stood silently, watching as the empty coffin remained before them, as if the sky and the earth themselves had decided to hide the truth from them. Each person present felt the invisible burden grow heavier, and Oksana's missing body became part of this unseen force. This was not just a funeral. It was a confrontation with something supernatural, with the shadows that haunt souls. Every whisper, every breath felt heavy, as if the very walls of the church were trying to swallow the people whole, to make them part of this unfathomable shadow. The priest finished the prayer, placing the cross on the empty coffin. This gesture, which should have been the conclusion, instead confirmed that Oksana's death was not an ordinary death. And as the procession moved once again toward the cemetery, the sense of peace did not come. On the contrary, an unexplored depth stretched out, swallowing the light and shadows. The priest finished the prayer, placing the cross on the empty coffin. This gesture, which should have been the conclusion, instead confirmed that Oksana's death was not an ordinary death. And as the procession moved once again toward the cemetery, the sense of peace did not come. On the contrary, an unexplored depth stretched out, swallowing the light and shadows. They lowered the coffin into the earth, and it seemed as if silence had returned. The earth swallowed the coffin, as if it wanted to hide the truth from everyone. And when the last of the people left the cemetery, as their footsteps grew quieter and the darkness once again filled the surrounding world, each of them felt an inexplicable fear. But this was not the end. In Oksana's home, when people began to gather, there was something that was hard to explain. Perhaps it was a reminder again that Oksana was not just a girl who had died. She was part of something larger. All the memories they shared, all the words that circled in the air, no longer made sense. When the last guests had left and only Oksana's parents and younger siblings remained in the house, the candle flames on the tables began to dim. As if tired from the long night, the air was thick, and even the cat, usually carefree as it roamed around, now hid in a corner, as if sensing an invisible threat. The night enveloped the house, and the silence was so deep that it seemed as though the walls themselves were breathing in the cold and breathing it out. Only the night wind, creeping through the cracks in the windows, whispered quietly, as though murmuring forgotten words. Those who remained slowly drifted into sleep, but before they could sink into the depths of dreams, a strange sound suddenly pierced the silence. At first, it was a barely audible tapping, almost indistinguishable, but terrifying. It was as if something had disrupted the peace of the night. A knock at the window, slow but insistent. Oksana's mother awoke first, her heart fluttering from the inexplicable feeling that filled her chest. The sound was so familiar, yet so foreign, that for a moment she could not believe her ears. "Oksana," she whispered, trying to recognize the familiar voice. Again, this time stronger, with a note of desperation. It was her voice. "Mom, open the door. I'm home. Please, let me in." Tears began to roll down her mother's cheeks again, and there was a gleam of pain and unreality in her eyes. She had already reached for the lock, her fingers trembling from the desire to let her child back into the house. But suddenly, Oksana's father grabbed her hand, and his face seemed to turn to stone from fear. Silently, but with horror in his eyes, he whispered, "It's not Oksana. Don't open the door." At that moment, they stepped back from the door, forgetting everything they might have said. The air was thick with tension, so filled with fear that it seemed the night itself had held its breath. Only the wind, which was once again howling outside, testified that the world still existed, but was now completely different. Oksana continued to beg, but her words grew more uncertain, trembling, as though she was beyond the bounds of reality. Her mother's body, seemingly under an invisible force, involuntarily took a step back, and at that moment, again, first a faint rumble, as if coming from beneath the earth, then knocks at the windows, now sounding as though someone was banging with all their might, trying to break through. Knock after knock tore through the calm of the night, and the house, as if alive, shuddered from this relentless force. After each strike, the roof creaked as if it were an old ship in a storm, and the walls began to tremble, unable to withstand this invisible pressure. Shadows, falling on the floor, changed their shapes, growing and consuming the space. The children awoke from the terror, their crying mixed with the banging. They clung to their parents, not understanding what was happening. Everyone in the house felt the boundaries between the world of the living and that which lay beyond it began to crack. The parents, overwhelmed by helpless anxiety, fell to their knees before the icons, bowing their heads in prayer. The mother helplessly crossed herself, her hands shaking so much that the candle on the table nearly went out. And then, when that deep, unfathomable bass, which broke the silence, sounded again, everyone felt it invade their bodies. "I will take you, ... The voice seemed to emerge from the very walls of the house, and the trees in the yard trembled as though breaking under the unbearable pressure of an invisible force. The wind howling through the cracks seemed to carry these words with it. Shadows from the curtains spread, growing darker, consuming the room, and creating the sense that this was not just night, it was death itself drawing closer with each subsequent blow to the windows and doors, with each howling gust of wind that entered the heart of the house. Everyone felt their peace being ripped apart. The children cried louder, and the parents, feeling this terribly frightening moment, continued to pray, even through tears, through fear, through the terror that gripped their hearts. And at this moment, when the ground began to tremble beneath their feet, they heard the first crow of the roosters. This was not the usual peaceful dawn. The roosters crowed as they never had before. Their voices were loud, anxious, piercing. It was as though they were tearing through the night, as if the heavens themselves were trying to restore order to the world after what had occurred. And when their cry reached its peak, everyone understood that this night was not just frightening. It was the cry of the world itself waking up from a long nightmare. And only when the last rooster crowed did the house gradually fall silent. The shadows began to fade. The fear retreated, and silence once again filled the rooms. But the morning light, when the first rays of the sun pierced through the curtains, the nightmarish ordeal ended, but a heavy shadow remained in their souls. For all who had survived that terrifying night felt that they had witnessed something much greater than just fear, something that had no explanation and never would. When morning arrived, the first rays of the sun barely touched the earth, but a heavy darkness lingered in the hearts of the parents. They stepped outside, filled with anxiety and doubts. As soon as they stepped onto the ground, they froze. Around the house, across the entire yard, there were visible tracks, as if something large and heavy had walked here, leaving deep, jagged imprints in the earth. These tracks were unusual. They resembled hooves, but not those of ordinary animals, rather something dark and terrifying that they could not comprehend. The parents shuddered. Their eyes met, and the same anxiety was reflected in their gaze. They did not know how or what could have made these tracks, but they felt that this was no ordinary occurrence. Was it just a nightmare or something sinister, unknown, and frightening? And though reason demanded explanations, they knew they could not face this alone. Their faith was their only support, and it was that faith that guided them to their decision. They decided to turn to the priest, an older, wiser man whom they trusted. He was a respected figure in the village, well-versed in many stories, and had vast experience in dealing with matters beyond human understanding. As they approached his house, the parents felt their hearts constrict with both hope and fear. Once they explained to him the events of that night, the priest listened attentively, without interrupting, focused and quiet, looking into the distance as if seeking a higher answer that they so desperately needed. When they finished their story, the room fell silent. The priest lowered his head quietly and, after a pause, spoke calmly, but with an uncheckable certainty in his voice. "Give me a few minutes, ... His voice was calm, but there was an unwavering confidence in it. The parents said nothing, just waiting, all of them on edge. The priest rose and left the room, leaving them in confusion and tension. Time seemed heavy and slow, each second stretched out like an eternity. What could this man say? Would he be able to make sense of what had happened? Are there explanations for the tracks on the ground, for what occurred that night? The priest stood silently on the doorstep, holding a heavy prayer book, his face more serious than ever before. He felt the atmosphere around them fill with an invisible threat, dark and deafening, as if the night itself was watching them with its black eyes. The shadow that filled the house seemed to pull them into an abyss, and the priest, standing on the threshold of two worlds, could sense that the other world was trying to break into theirs. His words grew heavier, as though each one carried the weight of an ancient terror that squeezed his throat. In those times, when there was another village, he began again. The people didn't even realize who lived among them. This man seemed to be just an ordinary man, no more, no less than anyone else. But his gaze was empty, and something dark and cold moved within him, waiting for the moment to release its death. The priest paused, as if listening to the echo of his own words. The silence in the house became deafening, and it was clear that no living sound remained in this world. He could even feel how the air around him grew thicker, heavy, as though he was trying to breathe through a thick, dark fog. He made sacrifices, living flesh. People disappeared, and no one could find an answer. Few suspected that this was only the beginning. When they caught him, he did not beg for mercy. He made a pact with dark forces, and these forces became his slaves. And now the priest stepped forward. When they burned him, and he should have died, they gave him an invisible gift. They made him the guardian of this land, this graveyard. He fell silent again, and in the stillness, the crackling of the wood could be heard faintly, as though a silent demon had just left the room. Fragments of light from the lantern on the windowsill, barely piercing the darkness, trembled from the drafts of air that whispered through the open gaps. I know this legend, he continued, looking back at the family with an expression that was both sympathetic and frightened. I heard it from the old villagers, but I always thought it was just a tale. Now I see that it is not. Oksana broke the rules, and perhaps that will not save her. All this time, as if in response to his words, the air in the house grew heavier, as though the very sky had bent under the weight of this secret. The mother could not stop trembling. Her hands grew cold, and her heart felt an awful emptiness. She stared at the priest, not believing what she was hearing from him, but everything inside her told her, this is the truth. This is not a fabrication, not a scary story. This is reality, which has come to take them. The priest lifted his head. His gaze became resolute, but he knew words would not help, only actions. You need to endure to more nights, he said, his voice now firm and authoritative. No contact with anyone outside. I will stay with you. I'll bring holy water, blessed salt, and my prayer book. We will purify your yard and sanctify the house. But remember, do not open the windows. Do not speak to it. This creature does not forgive those who call to it. It wants to take you all. The priest turned toward the door, and it seemed to tremble, as though it had not forgotten that dark night that had walked here. Beyond the threshold stood the night, cold and merciless, and in the darkness, someone or something was already waiting, ready to take its next step. As the priest walked across the dark yard, he prayed silently. His hands moved steadily, sprinkling holy water on the earth, each step marking a new curse upon the dark forces that had overtaken this place. The wind blowing from the forest, carrying the smells of dampness and old earth, brought something else with it. It wasn't just rustling. It seemed to be trying to whisper something in his ear. The feeling of being watched grew stronger as he entered the house. As the priest sanctified the rooms, every corner of the house seemed to fill with a terrifying silence that was broken only by the faint creaking of the wooden panels. And when he finished the rite, his face looked even more exhausted, and his voice barely reached their ears. This creature does not forgive those who break its boundaries. Oksana paid the price for her courage. Now, she has probably taken you with her into this terrible trap. Now, when their house had been purified, the priest was even more certain of his words. The nights that were approaching would be a true test for this family. Only prayers, patience and resolve could give them a chance to leave this place alive. He turned back to the family, who stood in the corner, grimly looking at him, feeling the same dreadful silence that was slowly consuming their hearts. They knew nothing would be the same as before. The dark forces had come, and they were ready to take what belonged to them. The night deeply embraced the earth, and the fog cast its heavy embrace on the villages. In the darkness, only the silhouettes of trees and rooftops moved like ghosts. Inside the house, there was such silence that it felt as if the very earth had clutched their hearts. The mother and father tried to calm their children, whispering prayers loudly, watching their eyes filled with fear. But even when everyone lay down to sleep, the parents' hearts could not find peace. The air was thick with tension, as if someone or something stood behind the door waiting. Unease enveloped them like the chill of a grave. They sat on the bed, their gaze fixed on the dark windows. All the doors were locked, all the windows securely closed, but no force could protect them from what was coming out of the darkness. It seemed that time had slowed down, stretched out, and each second felt like an eternity. The mother kept glancing at the clock, which seemed to move, but it was so slow that it felt like the clock on the wall could be nothing but a stone. Eventually, sleep began to overtake the parents, and under the influence of some magic, they drifted off, and then they dreamed. At first, it was a quiet dream, as if nothing had happened. Oksana was there, alive and well, and everything was just as it used to be. The mother felt her warmth, heard her voice, but suddenly Oksana changed. Her face became more blurred, as if erased from the very essence. Her eyes empty, her lips, which had slightly smiled, stretched into a horrifying grin that had nothing in common with the Oksana they loved. Again, they heard that same voice, now sounding like a hollow shadow. "Mom, open the door. It's me. I'm here, ... The parents bolted upright in bed, fear squeezing their throats, but still the mother, barely controlling herself, quickly got up and went to the door. And then, as if out of the air, something rumbled from the outside world. At first, it was a soft knock, then a heavy, indescribable noise, as if huge stones were rolling on the ground. This was not a storm, not wind, but the very essence of the night began to move towards them. The floor began to shake from the roar, the walls quivered, and it seemed that the house itself was on the verge of collapsing. The mother grabbed her husband's hand, their fingers intertwined in trembling defense. Their hearts beat in unison, equally struck by this terrifying force. Again, from outside the window, they heard that terrifying, unfamiliar voice, one that was not their daughter's. It was the monster that took everything alive, and now it had come for them. "You thought I wouldn't take you, that you would escape your fate. I will take you all." This scream tore the night apart, as if the very fabric of reality was ripping. The parents' eyes flashed with terror again. They hugged their children, holding them close, trying to protect them from what was outside the door. They all prayed without stopping, their legs growing weak from the tremors. The walls cracked, the curtains began to tear, and the house itself seemed on the verge of destruction. And then, as if nothing had happened, the first rooster crowed. It was so sharp, it tore through the darkness, pushing all the sounds away, destroying the evil that had poured into their ears. This was the signal that the night was over, that nothing would be the same anymore. And it happened. The evil dissolved in the fog, but before it disappeared, one last time a voice rang out, no longer a voice, but a groan, trembling, as if it came from hell itself. "You thought I wouldn't take you. I will still take you, and no one will save you now." Meanwhile, the roosters crowed so loudly, so sharply, as if awakening the very earth from its sleeplessness. Everything fell silent. The doors couldn't withstand it and shattered into pieces. The darkness was pierced only by a flash of light, and everything vanished. Like a gust of wind scattering dust, the parents stood in the doorway, looking at each other, their eyes empty with terror. Their hair turned white from what they had endured. They remained standing there, even after the light filled the room, dispelling the darkness, as if the fear remained in their souls, like an invisible, lingering nightmare that wouldn't let go. They went to the priest once more. The holy rite, the sacred prayers, this was the only thing that could help. But still, even when their home was made safe, when the doors were repaired and the prayers were spoken, the dreadful memories remained with them. They became a part of their lives. They prayed for Oksana's soul, though they knew that perhaps nothing could change anymore. But at least her soul deserved to be saved from this dreadful world. After what happened to Oksana, the people in the village changed their habits. After what happened to Oksana, there were no more evening strolls down the streets, no more gatherings under the starry sky. The fear of what had happened became a burden for every villager, and even though the sun illuminated the village during the day, night brought with it an unnatural silence. As soon as dinner was over and night descended upon the village, people no longer smiled or laughed. They simply hurried to close their doors, brace the windows to prevent any sound or shadow from slipping into their homes. Everyone knew it was better not to approach the cemetery, and even if they had to pass by it by accident, it no longer felt like just a path, but rather a trial. They had seen it, the same dark figure wandering among the graves. It seemed that this shadow was alive, a tangible, invisible evil. The light surrounding it was unusual, unnatural, like a shimmer from another world. This light was not the usual soft glow that might bring comfort. No, it was a light that tore through the night as though it were cutting the very air, as if an invisible source was burning and scattering the darkness, but not in a way that brought clarity or relief. This light looked dangerous and eerie, as if it were part of this forgotten and cursed place, and every time someone saw it, they understood it as a sign that their presence there was unacceptable. People who were out late in the evening and had the misfortune of passing near the cemetery always felt the tension in the air rise sharply. They began to feel the presence of something that threatened them. It wasn't just the cold, it was a true feeling of danger wrapping around them from head to toe, and even if they tried to walk faster, they could feel the gaze trailing behind them. Their steps sounded somehow louder, as if they themselves could be heard by this invisible watcher. And once again, the shadow appeared, moving among the graves. It wasn't quick. On the contrary, it moved slowly, with an unpredictable calm that only heightened the sense of fear. It repeatedly observed everyone who approached the cemetery. It looked as though it was studying and evaluating each person who dared to disturb its peace. This light, cold, pulsating would fade, then flare up again, as if the shadow itself was under the control of something otherworldly. And even after people tried to convince themselves that it was just a figment of their imagination, some of them could no longer sleep peacefully. It seemed that this shadow could not be forgotten. It became part of their nights, an invisible but constant burden. And even when the day arrived, there was something lacking in the light, as if it could not rid them of the feeling that this place had become home to something terrifying and incomprehensible. Nothing felt familiar anymore on those late evenings when people went about their business. The village no longer lived the way it once did. Everyone who stayed on the street after sunset felt something invisible watching them, and that something was possibly watching through the cemetery, through the old stones, through the earth that had swallowed many of those who had once come to it. The shadow in the cemetery did not disappear. It stood there like a guard, preventing anyone from passing through.